A mother dog and her pup, left drifting 158 miles from shore, clinging to a deflating pool float in the open ocean. No land, no rescue, no reason to hope. They were thrown overboard like they were nothing, disposable, forgotten. But something happened, something no one could explain. A woman, alone on her sailboat carrying heartbreak of her own, saw a golden shimmer in the waves. And what she did next, it changed everything. This story will break your heart and then gently stitch it back together. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I want to know how far Sunny's journey reaches, and if you believe animals feel pain, if you believe every soul deserves a second chance. Hit subscribe, because this story will live inside you long after the final wave settles. The ocean off the coast of Cape May was unnaturally calm that morning, stretching like brushed steel beneath a pale sky that hadn't quite decided between mist and sun. A thin haze hovered just above the waterline, turning the horizon into something imagined rather than seen. The forecast had called for light offshore winds and soft swells, perfect conditions for a solo sail, the kind Madeline Harper had come to crave. Her sailboat, Wanderer, cut silently through the morning glass, about 158 miles from shore. Out here, there were no cameras, no crowds, and no apologies. Only wind, memory, and salt. Madeline was 32, lean from years of sport, with sun-darkened skin and hair that had once been a bright copper, but now faded into something closer to seaweed gold. She wore it in a simple braid under her faded ball cap, the same cap her late partner had given her 3 weeks before he died. Her eyes were gray-green, the color of stormy shallows, and they carried a look that never softened, even when she smiled, which wasn't often. A former championship sailor turned recluse. Madeline had vanished from public life after Evan's death in the world solo race off Newfoundland 3 years prior. She still wore his watch, broken at the clasp, as if time stopped when he drowned. She leaned on the starboard rail, sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented thermos, when something caught her eye. A flicker of gold just off her bow, bobbing strangely in the water. Not the smooth arc of a dolphin's back or the harsh flash of trash. This was something softer, shivering. She set the cup down and reached for her binoculars. What she saw made her breath stall. There, drifting helplessly on a nearly deflated pool float, was a dog. Not just any dog, a large golden retriever soaked to the bone, her head drooped, eyes glazed but open. Clinging to her back, half limp, was a smaller dog, a puppy, barely more than 4 months old. The float was losing air fast, its edges curling inward, and every wave lapped higher against their sides. The ocean was swallowing them by inches. Madeline didn't think. She moved on instinct. She released the mainsail, killed the rudder lock, and steered Wanderer into a gentle turn. She dropped anchor just 50 yards off the floating shapes and stripped her jacket in one movement. She had been a rescue diver before she was a sailor. Training kicked in as she grabbed the emergency rope, tied it around her waist, and dove. The water was cold despite the sun, and it hit her chest like a slap. She kept her strokes strong, counting them out like she had back in her teenage lifeguard days. 20 strokes. 30. She was there. The retriever didn't react much, just turned her head faintly as Madeline approached. Up close, Madeline could see how badly she was shaking, her ribs prominent under the soaked fur, her eyes rimmed red with salt and fatigue. The puppy, lighter in build with a creamy coat, clung to her with surprising strength for his size, Madeline placed a firm hand on the float. "It's okay, girl. I've got you," she murmured. The retriever blinked slowly. Her name was unknown, her story yet untold. But her eyes, amber honey and full of a pain no animal should know, held trust. With a heave, Madeline pulled the float toward her and looped her other arm around the larger dog's chest. The puppy squeaked softly but didn't fight. One arm swimming, the other pulling, Madeline hauled them inch by inch through the water until she reached the side of her boat, where she'd already dropped the emergency ladder. It was awkward. The retriever, tall, muscular even now in her emaciated state, slid against the metal steps as Madeline pushed her up from below. She helped brace the puppy with her shoulder, nudging him higher. It took everything she had, but eventually, both dogs collapsed onto the deck, wheezing, soaked, but alive. Madeline hauled herself up last, breathless. She dropped to her knees beside them. The puppy coughed, a wet, raspy sound, but soon nestled against the older dog's flank. The retriever raised her head slowly and licked his ears. "You're her baby," Madeline whispered, "and she never stopped saving you." She pulled a dry towel from the emergency locker and began rubbing them down. The bigger dog winced, but didn't pull away. The smaller one, barely more than a golden fuzzball with oversized paws, let out a low, tired whine and pressed his face into Madeline's knee. They didn't have collars, no ID tags, but something about their presence, especially the mother, felt deliberate, not wild, not lost, discarded. Madeline wrapped them both in a dry tarp and checked the float. It had the faint print of a cartoon whale on it and a sharp puncture through one corner. Likely, it had kept them alive through the first day, maybe even the second. But it would have given out before sunset today. Her mind raced with questions. How had they ended up 158 miles from land? Why were they together? Who would throw a dog, 2 dogs, into the sea? And more than that, who had tried to save them? She looked toward the horizon. The tide had been strange lately. Just 3 days earlier, a freak current had pulled 2 paddleboarders nearly 10 miles south before the Coast Guard found them. Could these dogs have drifted from a yacht? A ferry? Madeline didn't have answers, only instincts. She turned her attention back to the retriever. Her breathing was shallow but steady. The puppy was asleep now, his head rising and falling with his mother's side. "You're not supposed to be here," she said aloud, her voice catching in the breeze. "But you are. And maybe, so am I." She sat there on the deck as the wind shifted behind her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. The waves lapped gently against the hull. The ocean, so wide and uncaring, had given something back. Maybe it was time to figure out why. By the time Madeline Harper steered the Wanderer into the cove near her cabin, the sun had begun its slow descent behind the dunes, casting bronze shadows across the shoreline. The wind which had carried her out that morning had quieted, leaving behind only the rhythmic hush of waves against the hull. Cape May was a whisper now, a sleepy ghost of a town where life moved slower after tourist season died down. Her home sat half-hidden behind tall beach grasses, an aging cedar cabin with peeling white paint, a warped porch, and a weathered windsock that had long stopped spinning. It had been her retreat since Evan died, a place where silence could fold itself around grief without judgment. Madeline carried Pebble in her arms, first wrapped gently in a towel. He weighed next to nothing, his limbs limp, his soft cream-colored fur matted with seawater. His nose twitched as she stepped onto the dock, but he didn't stir. Sunny followed slowly, and without a leash, her paws unsure on the wood. Though soaked and trembling, The mother dog kept her eyes fixed on the bundle in Madeline's arms, every muscle of her emaciated body pulled tight with unspoken panic. The moment Madeline set Pebble down on a thick fleece blanket inside the cabin, Sunny curled around him, not even shaking off the seawater clinging to her fur. Madeline knelt beside them. She had dried them both as much as she could on the boat, but here in the warmer air with clean towels and a space that didn't rock underfoot, she could take more care. She cleaned Sunny's ears, gently whispering reassurances. The dog didn't flinch. She simply watched the door, as if expecting someone to return, someone Madeline couldn't see. The inside of the cabin smelled of salt lavender and old wood. There were no framed photos on the walls, no furniture that matched. Just a simple couch, a pine kitchen table, and a large, braided rug in the center where Madeline had laid out the bedding for her guests. She moved quietly barefoot, setting a bowl of lukewarm water near Sunny's head and a second smaller one next to it for Pebble. Sunny lapped cautiously. Pebble did not move. She stood and crossed to the corner of the kitchen where a flip phone rested on a charging pad. Its screen blinked once as she touched it. Her thumb hovered over a name, Gus Holloway, before she pressed the green call button. Gus answered on the second ring. "Madeline, I figured you were out early. You usually are when the air gets that thin." His voice was gravelly, a little frayed at the edges. Gus was a retired Coast Guard operator turned dog rescue volunteer. 72, tall and wiry with deep-set eyes the color of driftwood, he lived in a trailer 2 miles up the shore and had a reputation for saving things that didn't want saving, boats, dogs, and people included. "I found something," Madeline said. Or, "Someone really." 2 dogs, a mother and her pup. They were out there, Gus. I mean really out there. Floating on an inflatable. The damn thing was collapsing. Gus let out a breath, alive barely. "But yeah, and you want me to come get them?" She looked over her shoulder. Sunny's eyes met hers, quiet, ancient, and unblinking. "I don't know," Madeline admitted. "I was going to ask, but now, I don't think I can." Gus was silent for a moment. "Well, you don't have to decide tonight. You've got that cot in the corner, right?" "Yeah. Let them rest. Let you rest. I'll come by tomorrow. If it still feels wrong, we'll find another way." "Thanks, Gus. You always call when the tide's pulling something in." She hung up and turned back to the dogs. Sunny had rested her chin on Pebble's side now. Her breathing was slow, her eyes half shut. Madeline approached with a bowl of soft chicken and rice she had warmed over the stove. Sunny sniffed it, but didn't eat. Pebble made no motion at all. Madeline sat cross-legged on the rug beside them. She didn't know why she felt so tangled inside. She had pulled more than one animal from disaster zones before, whales tangled in crab pots, seabirds caught in oil slicks. But this was different. These 2 weren't lost to chance. They had been abandoned. She studied Sunny again. The dog's fur was mottled with salt and knots, but beneath it she saw the ghost of structure, broad shoulders, defined haunches, a runner's body. Sunny had once been strong, maybe trained. She wasn't just any house pet. This dog had known command purpose. She had endured something and carried her child through it. Madeline whispered, "Who threw you away?" Outside, the tide began to rise again. The sound made Sunny twitch. Her body tensed, her ears flattened, and she let out the faintest of growls, not at Madeline but at the noise itself. The waves. Pebble stirred then. A paw flexed, and his head shifted slightly. Madeline leaned in. "Come on, little one. Wake up." The pup's eyes opened just a slit. They were a soft hazel, almost gold, and filled with the dreamy confusion of someone returned from far too deep. He didn't whine. He simply blinked, looked around, and after a long pause nuzzled deeper into Sonny's fur. Madeline smiled without realizing it. "You're here. That's enough." She spent the evening on the porch. A lantern flickered by her elbow as she wrote notes on the backs of old maps. Time coordinates direction of current. She was trying to solve it like a mystery, but the pieces refused to align. There was no storm reported 2 days ago. No missing persons, no boats sunk or planes downed. Nothing. Except these two. The night came in soft. No traffic. No lights but the moon. From inside the cabin came the occasional sound of shifting paws, a soft sigh, the rustle of blankets. Madeline didn't call Gus back. Morning came with a low fog curling in from the sea, wrapping the cabin in silence, thick enough to muffle even the gulls. Madeline Harper stepped onto the porch with a mug of black coffee cradled in both hands, her shoulders wrapped in an old wool shawl. The boards underfoot were damp, smelling of salt and pine resin. Inside, the two dogs still slept a tangle of fur and slow breaths. The puppy had shifted in the night, his head now resting against the crook of Sonny's front leg. Sonny, though still gaunt, looked more at peace than she had the day before, though her eyes remained open, one ear tilted toward the distant crash of waves. Madeline set her mug down and stepped back inside. The warmth from the wood stove had softened the air, and the cabin felt less like a cave and more like a home. She knelt beside Sonny with a soft, bristled brush in hand and began working carefully through the mats along the dog's shoulder. Salt crust crackled under her fingers, the remnants of a battle no animal should have had to endure. Sonny didn't resist. She merely turned her head slightly, watching Madeline with those steady, gold-ringed eyes. It was during this quiet ritual that Madeline felt something odd under the fur, a jagged ridge near the neck, where the coat had grown uneven. She parted the hair and found it a frayed piece of green nylon buried and half hidden in the fur. It had once been a collar or part of one, but it was cut, not snapped. And where the tag should have hung, there was nothing, just a rust-marked ring where metal had once rubbed against fabric. Madeline frowned and whispered, "Someone didn't want you identified, did they?" Sonny blinked slowly, but her breath hitched. After another few minutes of gentle brushing, Madeline wrapped the nylon fragment in a paper towel, folded it, and slid it into the pocket of her jacket. She glanced toward Pebble, who had begun nibbling lightly at softened kibble she'd mixed with broth earlier. It was a hopeful sign, if a small one. Later that morning, Madeline loaded the dogs into the back of her Subaru. She laid down a thick quilt and placed a travel crate for Pebble, though Sonny refused to be separated from him even for a second. The mother climbed in beside the crate, her body curling protectively around it, as Madeline shut the hatch. The roads leading into Cape May were empty at this hour, lined with loblolly pines and the occasional deer vanishing into the brush. The town itself was still quiet in the off-season, with storefronts closed and porches empty. The veterinary clinic sat on the edge of town, a modest one-story building painted in faded peach, with a wind spinner in the shape of a dog chasing a cat whirling in the breeze. The painted sign above the door read Harbor Paws Animal Clinic. Inside, the scent of antiseptic and lavender hung in the air. A woman in her early 40s stepped out from behind the desk as Madeline entered. She had chestnut-brown hair tied into a bun, glasses perched low on her nose, and wore navy scrubs under a zip-up hoodie with paw prints on the sleeves. "Hey there. I'm Dr. Brenna Lowe," she said, offering a soft smile. "We don't usually get walk-ins before 10, but come on back." Dr. Lowe was the kind of woman who moved quietly, but not timidly calm in the way of someone who had spent years dealing with creatures in pain. She had a faint scar along her left temple, half hidden under her hair, and when she noticed Madeline glancing at it, she said simply, "Got kicked by a mule in Wyoming. Taught me to stay on the smarter end of the animal." Madeline chuckled, tension easing from her shoulders. "They're rescues," she said, nodding to the dogs now curled on the exam room floor. "Kind of. I found them offshore. 158 miles. No tags, no chip. Just a broken collar." "Doctor." Lo knelt and examined Sunny first. Her hands were firm but gentle, checking teeth, eyes, joints. She paused at the base of the neck. "Burn mark from friction," she said. And this, she ran a thumb over a rough scab beneath the fur, could be from a rope. Like she was tied down. But it's healed some. Older than the ocean trauma. She turned to the puppy next, who whimpered softly as she touched his stomach. Mild dehydration, nothing critical. He's tougher than he looks. Dr. Lowe stood. "This isn't a stray," she said, voice low. "This girl, she's been trained, fed, well exercised, maybe even worked. She knows how to conserve energy. The way she's guarding that pup, it's not instinct alone. She made choices to survive, hard ones." Madeline nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The vet continued. "She also risked everything. Which tells me something else. She wasn't running away. She was trying to protect him." Madeline felt the words hit like a gust of cold wind. After printing out temporary intake records and giving Sunny a mild anti-inflammatory shot, Dr. Lowe handed Madeline a small envelope with electrolyte powder, feeding instructions, and a gentle cleanser for Sunny's skin. "They'll need time, but they'll make it." On the way out, Madeline passed a bulletin board pinned with photos of lost pets. She paused, scanning them. None matched Sunny or Pebble, though several golden retrievers smiled back in faded snapshots. Under her breath, she muttered, "They never intended you to come back, did they?" That night, back at the cabin, the air had cooled again. Pebble ate half a bowl of food without prompting. Sunny licked his ears and lay beside him, her flank finally rising with something like ease. Madeline sat on the porch, the torn collar in her palm. Someone had cut it. Someone had tried to erase them. But they were still here. The storm had come in quick and mean the night before. Low thunder growling just off the coast, wind snapping through the dunes like something wild had been let loose. Madeline hadn't slept much. The sound of wind slamming against the eaves of the cabin made Sunny tremble again, and Pebble had cried out in his sleep, his paws twitching as if paddling away from something he couldn't escape. Madeline had moved their bedding close to the stove, lit an extra lantern, and curled up nearby with a book she never opened. By morning, the air was heavy with salt, and the ground strewn with seaweed shells and debris flung high by the surf. The tide had dragged odd things up onto the shore, before half-rotten crates, rubber sandals, even once a broken guitar. But today, something about the way the light hit the sand made Madeline walk the stretch more slowly than usual. She wore rubber boots over her jeans and a thick fisherman's sweater that smelled faintly of cedar and old firewood. Sunny trailed behind her without a leash, nose down, sniffing every patch of seagrass, while Pebble stayed nestled back at the cabin, wrapped in a towel like a secret. It was about a quarter mile from the edge of the cove when she saw it, a plastic bottle half buried in damp sand, its shape irregular. She bent to pick it up, intending to toss it into her beach cleanup bag, but something clinked inside. Turning it in her hands, she saw moisture beading on the inner surface, and through that, the faint impression of crumpled paper. She unscrewed the cap and reached in with her fingers. The paper was soft, with damp edges beginning to dissolve. She peeled it open carefully, breath hitching. As she read the first uneven line scrawled in pencil, she threw them overboard. "I gave them the float. Please don't let Sunny die." Ethan, the writing was childish. The letters wide and uneven, smudged where water had soaked the paper. But the message was clear, and it froze her in place. Madeline stared out at the water. The waves were gentler now, but the bottle could have been tossed in days ago, maybe more, and carried for miles. But the name, Sonny, it wasn't a coincidence. Someone knew the dog's name, someone who had tried to help, and someone else who hadn't. She read the note again, tracing the edges of the name Ethan. The A had a tail like a backward 6. He must have been young and terrified. Back at the cabin, she laid the note on the windowsill to dry and gave Sonny an extra handful of cooked rice and boiled chicken. Sonny didn't eat at first, just stared at the note through the glass, as if she too recognized the shape of her name. Later that afternoon, Madeline stopped by the dockside marina in town. The harbor office was a squat, beige building tucked between the bait shop and the boatyard, always smelling of diesel fish and coffee that had sat too long. Inside, she found Arthur Red Connors, a retired shrimper, who now ran the marina's fuel dock. He was in his late 60s, heavy-set, with a ruddy complexion, gray hair sticking out from under a battered green cap, and fingers stained yellow from tobacco. He'd lived in Cape May his whole life, and remembered every boat, every captain, and every gossip worth retelling. Red Madeline greeted him, slipping the bottle onto the counter. "You seen anything odd dock out recently? Big boats, private ones, family types?" He scratched at his chin, squinting at the bottle. "Past few days, weather kept most folk out of the water, but yeah. There was that white Sunseeker. Fancy thing. Came in last Thursday, left again by Saturday afternoon. Real polished types. Man in a blazer, woman in heels on a damn deck. Kid, though. Quiet little guy. Stayed back while they fueled up." Madeline's heart thudded once. "Do you remember his name?" Red looked at her, then down at the note she unfolded. He read slowly, his lips moving silently. When he got to the signature, he nodded once. "Yeah, that's it. Ethan. Poor kid, looked like he'd rather be anywhere but there. Didn't say a word. Just clutched this little stuffed wolf and stared out at the water. Do you know where they were heading?" He exhaled. Out toward the open. Said they were taking the yacht south to Charleston. Rich folk like that, they bounce from harbor to harbor. Hard to track once they pull anchor. Madeline pressed her hands to the counter to steady herself. Could someone toss a bottle from a yacht that size and have it wash up here? Red shrugged. Tides make fools of all of us, but yeah, storm surge, good wind, it could happen. Outside, the air had cooled again. Madeline held the note like a fragile talisman, her eyes scanning the distant line of surf. A boy had tried to save his dogs, thrown overboard by a woman, by someone cruel enough to try to erase two living creatures. And the boy had done the only thing he could. He had given them hope. Madeline drove home with the windows cracked, salt air rushing in. When she pulled up to the cabin, Sonny was waiting at the edge of the porch, head tilted, ears alert. Madeline crouched down and let the bottle roll onto the wood between them. This came from him, she whispered. From your boy. Sonny leaned in her nose, brushing the plastic, and then so gently let out a soft, hollow whimper. The Reynolds estate sat at the end of Breakwater Road, a long gravel lane flanked by manicured hedges and stone markers that made even the air feel unwelcome. The house itself was a modernized, colonial, pristine white siding, black shutters, and high-arched windows that caught the ocean sun like mirrors. It loomed behind a wrought iron gate that seemed less about keeping things out and more about keeping secrets in. Madeline Harper parked her car half a block away under the shade of a windswept oak and walked the rest of the way on foot, her boots crunching faintly on the roadside gravel. She wore a gray windbreaker pulled low over her cap and carried a folded envelope inside her back pocket. Nothing official, just a handwritten note that read, "Sonny is alive. She saved your note. That was all. She hadn't signed it. The information from Red Connors had brought her here along with an image she couldn't shake. A boy named Ethan clutching a stuffed animal, watching the water like he had lost something no one else could see. There were 2 mailboxes near the gate, one for Reynolds, etched in brass, and another labeled Service Only. She ignored them both and moved to the side hedge, tall and thick but thinning slightly, where the land dipped. From there she crouched low and waited. It was close to 4 o'clock when she saw movement beyond the fence. A young boy wandered into view, no older than 9 or 10, slight and pale, with a mop of brown hair that curled around his ears. He wore a red flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a pair of khaki shorts that hung too big on his frame. He held something in both hands, what looked like a thin sketch pad, and walked with the posture of someone used to being quiet. Madeline's breath caught. It had to be him. She watched for a moment longer, then carefully unfolded the envelope and slipped it through the fence's lowest bar. She whistled soft, like calling a curious bird. Ethan stopped, his head lifted slowly, eyes scanning until he saw her. He didn't speak, didn't shout, just stood frozen, the sketch pad pressed to his chest. Madeline pointed to the note. After a long pause, Ethan stepped forward hesitantly and picked up the envelope. He opened it, read the 2 sentences, and blinked, hard, lips parting. Then, in a motion so quick it felt like instinct, he slipped something from his sketch pad, a photograph, and dropped it back through the bars. Then he ran. Madeline waited 5 full minutes before retrieving the photo. It was slightly wrinkled, glossy, and warm from his hands. In it, a much happier Ethan sat on a dock in a blue life vest, grinning beside Sunny, who leaned into him with her tongue out. Pebble, smaller than maybe only a couple months old, was curled in Ethan's lap like a sleepy feather duster. Madeline's hands shook as she tucked the photo into her coat. There was no mistaking it now. Sunny and Pebble hadn't just belonged to someone. They had belonged to him. And now they were gone, torn from him, by the very people who should have protected both him and them. Back at the cabin, she pinned the photo to the inside of a kitchen cabinet door, out of sight, but never far. Pebble napped on a blanket near the stove belly, full, finally sleeping deeply. Sunny had begun to walk better, her gait still stiff, but she followed Madeline more now, no longer just keeping her distance. That evening, Madeline made a single call on her burner cell, a number she hadn't dialed in years. "Hey," she said when the line picked up. "I need to ask you about tracking down a yacht. Private outbound from Cape May last week. The name's Reynolds. And there's a boy on board who doesn't deserve what's being done to him." The voice on the other end paused. "You getting back in the game, Harper?" "No," she said. "I'm just giving someone a chance to win theirs." The sun hung low over Cape May as Madeline returned to Breakwater Road, this time just before dusk. She came with no plan, only the photo in her jacket and a question burning in her chest. The street was empty. Lawn sprinklers ticked in the distance. She stopped by the same patch of hedge and crouched low behind it, her knees pressing into the cold dirt. Minutes passed. Then a flicker of movement, the boy again, Ethan, walking the perimeter alone, clutching that same sketch pad. His shoulders were hunched forward, his steps slow, as if dragged by weight no child should carry. Madeline waited until he came close, then whispered, "Ethan." He froze. She stepped forward just enough for him to see her, but kept her hands visible, non-threatening. "I'm not here to scare you," she said gently. "I'm the one who left the note." Ethan looked over his shoulder toward the house, then back at her. His voice was barely a breath. "Is Sunny really alive?" Madeline nodded. "And Pebble, too. They're safe now." His lower lip trembled, and for a moment it looked like he might cry, but he didn't. Instead, he reached into the sketch pad and handed her another folded note through the fence. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back toward the house, disappearing behind the hedges, like a shadow melting into dusk. Madeline unfolded the paper once she returned to the car. The handwriting was messier this time, but the words were clear. She threw them off the boat, said they were dirty. She knew I loved them. I tried to stop her. I threw the float. Please don't let her find out I talked to you. The she in question had a name now. Tina. Tina Reynolds. Madeline had seen her once years ago in a coastal fundraising gala. A woman with impeccable posture, almond-shaped eyes, and a smile like cold porcelain. Tina had been known for hosting elite yacht socials and for having married Henry Reynolds, a real estate magnate 30 years her senior. Madeline remembered whispers of how quickly Tina had taken over his public appearances and how rarely his son Ethan was seen at all. Back at the cabin, she sat on the floor near the hearth with Sonny resting beside her. The fire cracked gently in the stone hearth, its light casting long, golden strokes across the walls. Pebble snoozed nearby with one paw twitching in a dream. Madeline read the note again, then looked into Sonny's eyes. "You didn't fall," she whispered. "She threw you because she couldn't control the one thing he loved more than her." Sonny shifted and laid her head against Madeline's knee. The next morning, Madeline drove into town and made her way to the Cape May Police Department, a squat brick building tucked between a deli and a bait shop. Inside the front desk, officer was a lean man in his 50s with thinning blonde hair and sharp, skeptical eyes. His name tag read, Deputy Colin Mercer. "I'd like to report suspected animal abuse," Madeline said, sliding the photo and both handwritten notes across the desk. Mercer glanced at them, brow furrowing. "Where did you get these? I rescued 2 dogs. They were thrown overboard 158 miles offshore. This boy Ethan saved their lives with a float and left these notes. His stepmother, Tina Reynolds, did it. She owns a Sunseeker yacht registered out of Charleston." Mercer rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This isn't exactly jurisdictional," he muttered. "That far offshore, technically, it's Coast Guard business. And unless the dogs have permanent injuries and someone witnesses the actual act, it's hard to push cruelty charges, especially against the Reynolds family." Madeline stared at him. "So what you do, nothing, we log it," he said, then leaned closer. "Off the record. You're up against money. That woman's got connections, legal insulation, the works. But if you want something to happen, take it outside the system." Madeline left without another word. By the time she reached the diner 2 blocks over, she had already dialed a number she hadn't used in years. Kendra Vale, an investigative journalist, who now ran a viral web channel covering animal justice cases. Kendra had once been Madeline's college roommate and had a reputation for spotlighting stories the courts ignored. Kendra picked up on the second ring. "Harper," she said, surprised. "I thought you were off the map. I need a favor," Madeline said, her voice tight. "A story. It's about a boy, a dog, and the woman who tried to erase both." By late afternoon, Madeline also sent copies of the letters and photo to Protect the Young, a nonprofit watchdog group for child advocacy. She left the name anonymous for now, but detailed everything she'd learned. She didn't trust the system anymore, but she trusted exposure. Back at the cabin, the sun filtered in soft over the porch. Pebble barked in his sleep, a short, muffled yip. Sonny sat beside the window, eyes fixed on the open stretch of sea. Madeline sat nearby, her laptop open, the cursor blinking over Kendra's reply, "I'm in. Let's burn them with truth." The rain began at dawn. Not heavy, not loud, just the kind of slow, steady drizzle that coated everything in mist and made the world feel muffled, blurred around the edges. From her cabin window, Madeline Harper could see the sea barely moving its surface dulled to pewter. The road leading away from the coast glistened darkly under the soft fall of rain. She stood with her hands in the pockets of her waxed coat, watching Sunny and Pebble sleep curled together on the rug. They were stronger now. Sunny's ribs were less visible, and Pebble had taken to exploring the porch steps, tail wagging like a slow metronome. But something hung in the air today. Something final. By mid-morning, a black SUV pulled up near the end of Breakwater Road, followed by a white van bearing the logo of South Shore Animal Protection League, and finally a car with out-of-state plates, Connecticut. The woman who stepped out of it carried a black leather bag and moved like someone who'd learned to speak with cameras. This was Kendra Vale, the journalist Madeline had called. Kendra was in her late 30s with olive skin and long, dark curls pinned into a knot behind her head. She wore dark jeans boots and a tailored navy coat that gave her the air of someone both stylish and serious. Her expression was all business, but her eyes softened the moment she saw Madeline. They exchanged a quick hug, brief, silent, but real. "Is he still there?" Kendra asked. Madeline nodded. And so is she. The officer in charge was Detective Roy Merton, a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with close-cut gray hair and a calm, measured way of speaking. His badge was clipped to his belt beside a leather notebook. Merton had been pulled in from Trenton after the materials Madeline and Kendra submitted were flagged by Protect the Young. Unlike Deputy Mercer, Merton had read every line of the notes, and he had children of his own. At 10:27 a.m., the three cars rolled up the gravel drive to the Reynolds estate. The rain hadn't let up. Tina Reynolds greeted them in white linen slacks and a peach blouse, lips painted, hair pinned, looking every bit the hostess, despite the storm. She narrowed her eyes as the group approached her portico. "Can I help you?" she said, voice taut. Merton stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're here to investigate a formal complaint involving allegations of animal cruelty and potential child endangerment." Tina blinked, then gave a breathy laugh. "You must be joking. This is absurd. Do you know who my husband is?" "We do," Merton said evenly. "We're not here for him." Kendra stepped forward, camera crew trailing behind at a respectful distance. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, voice crisp. "We have testimony from a child, 2 physical letters and photographic evidence linking you to the intentional abandonment of 2 dogs at sea. We'd like a statement on record." Tina's mask cracked slightly. Her eyes flared, and her voice dropped a note. "I want you off my property." Merton didn't move. "Where is Ethan Reynolds?" At that, Tina hesitated. "He's upstairs, resting." "May we speak with him?" he asked. She crossed her arms. "He's not well. You'll upset him." "Ma'am," Merton said, his tone hardening. "We have a court order for a wellness check." The silence that followed was thin and dangerous. Eventually, Tina stepped aside, letting them in. The living room was immaculate, white leather couches, glass sculptures, and a baby grand piano. Ethan sat on the far side of the room near the stairs, holding his stuffed wolf gaze wary. He wore the same red flannel shirt Madeline had seen before. Merton crouched to his level. "Hi, Ethan. My name's Roy. I'd like to ask you a few questions. You don't have to say anything you don't want to, but if something happened, you can tell me." Ethan looked toward Tina, who stood frozen behind the detective. Then slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the same wrinkled envelope he had passed through the fence. He handed it to Merton. "She threw them," he said quietly, "because she thought they were in the way." Tina stepped forward. "He's confused. You can't take the word of a child." "Actually," Kendra interjected, holding up a file, "we can. especially when we also have a witness statement from the harbor, the child's handwritten testimony, and video confirmation that the dogs exist alive and rescued. Merton stood. Mrs. Reynolds, at this time we are opening a formal investigation into allegations of cruelty toward animals and potential psychological abuse of a minor. You are not under arrest, but we ask that you remain available for questioning. Tina's face lost its color. She turned to Ethan, but he had already stepped behind Merton. Outside, the rain still fell quiet and clean. Later that day, Ethan was taken into protective custody by DHS officer Marlene Price, a warm, practical woman in her early 40s with auburn hair and crow's feet at her eyes from smiling too much in hard jobs. She wore no makeup, just a calm presence and a soft flannel scarf. Marlene had been working with children for 16 years and had a special place in her heart for the quiet ones. She offered Ethan a choice of places to stay while legal placement was determined. He asked only one question: "Can I see Sonny again?" It had been 32 days since the hearing. Cape May had shifted into the pale gold of early spring when the winds softened and the sea no longer whispered of winter. The wild grasses behind Madeline's cabin had started to rise green again, and gulls wheeled overhead in pairs, shrieking less from hunger and more from joy. Everything felt a little lighter. Not because the world had changed, but because something in it had finally been set right. The cabin porch held new footprints now. Pebble's small paws tracked muddy half-circles from the garden to the door, and Ethan's sneakers, always slightly scuffed, left messy trails in the sand. Madeline Harper watched them from the open doorway, her eyes softer than they had been in years. Ethan was here. A court in Trenton had ruled that Henry Reynolds, Ethan's biological father, would retain custody. But Henry, who had spent the last months unraveling his own silence and guilt, agreed to place Ethan in temporary care with Madeline, under what the court called a kin-like arrangement. Henry had said it simply: "He trusts you more than he's ever trusted me." That's reason enough. Ethan, now 10, seemed different already. Still quiet, still watchful, but less sunken. He laughed now, small, real laughs that bubbled up when Pebble tried to carry 2 tennis balls at once, or when Sonny flopped onto his feet, groaning dramatically. He wore the same red flannel, most days sleeves pushed to the elbows, and had a habit of standing with one hand tucked into his pocket, like a grown man who forgot he was still a boy. Sonny had healed too. Her coat had grown back thick and warm, her gait steady. She no longer flinched at crashing waves. Now she walked beside Ethan without a leash, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, always near. Her eyes were calm, amber-lit, protective. Home. Pebble, now 5 months old, had developed a mischievous streak. Slightly larger, with thick cream fur and a pink tongue that never stopped lolling, he would chase every gull and bark at the waves, like he could outrun the ocean. He still slept curled between Sonny's front legs every night, but he had learned to trust more than just his mother now. He had learned to trust the boy, too. That morning, Madeline had taken them all to the beach. She carried a canvas bag filled with treats, Ethan's sketch pad, and an old kite that hadn't seen the sky since Evan's last summer. The kite was shaped like a sailboat, its blue cloth still catching light when the wind caught it just right. As they reached the dunes, Pebble sprinted ahead, sand flying behind him like confetti. Sonny followed at a steady pace, tongue out, tail low, but not tense. Ethan stayed beside Madeline, his hand brushing hers sometimes without realizing it. "Are we going to try it?" he asked, gesturing to the bag. Madeline smiled. "We're going to try." They reached the wide stretch of beach where the wind tugged a little more freely. Madeline handed the kite to Ethan. He held it with both hands, arms shaking not from fear, but anticipation. She stood behind him, adjusting the tail and giving a nod. "Wait for the gust," she said. When it came, Ethan ran. The kite leapt, tail streaming behind like a banner. It dipped once, caught again, then soared. Pebble barked and ran in circles beneath it. Sunny stood still beside Madeline, her eyes following the sail through the air. Madeline didn't move. She just watched the boy and the wind and the thing she hadn't let herself feel in years' relief. That afternoon, back at the cabin, Ethan sat on the porch step, sketching Pebble asleep in a coil of rope. His lines were simple but thoughtful, each one drawn with quiet attention. Inside, Madeline unpacked the canvas sail she hadn't dared touch for 3 years. It smelled of salt and memory. She laid it across the deck of the Wanderer, her old sailboat now resting quietly in the cove. She didn't hoist it yet. Not today. But she ran her hand along the edge of the canvas and didn't cry. As the light faded, she called softly, "Ethan." He appeared at the doorway with Sunny at his side. She gestured toward the boat. "Want to help me finish something?" They climbed aboard together. Pebble followed, yawning. Madeline handed Ethan a loop of cord and showed him how to secure the cleat. He worked in silence but smiled once when Sunny sat squarely at the bow, staring out toward the darkening water. They stayed there until the first star appeared. Ethan sat cross-legged on the deck, Pebble dozing in his lap. Sunny lay beside him, one paw resting gently over the boy's shoe. Madeline sat behind the tiller, not steering, just present. "You think they remember?" Ethan asked suddenly. Madeline turned. "Remember what before? The water. Being thrown." Madeline looked at Sunny. Her ears flicked. She hadn't moved, but her eyes had closed. "I think Madeline said they remember what mattered more." "Who stayed?" Ethan didn't answer. But when he leaned back against the sail, his head rested on Sunny's shoulder. Sometimes miracles do not come as flashes of light or voices from the sky. Sometimes they come as a tired dog still swimming after 158 miles, a trembling child who finds the courage to write a message in a bottle, or a woman who opens her heart when it would have been easier to turn away. In a world that often feels cold and chaotic, this story reminds us that grace still lives in quiet places, in the wag of a tail, in the courage of a small act, and in the belief that no life is ever too far gone to be saved. Sunny and Pebble were thrown away, but they were not forgotten. Ethan was silenced, but he was not forsaken. And Madeline, who thought her days of meaning had passed, was called once more to love, protect, and begin again. Maybe that is the miracle, when broken hearts find one another and heal, not through force, but through kindness. Maybe God works not just through thunder and fire, but through compassion, through a child's courage, through the bond between human and animal that speaks a language deeper than words. If this story touched you, please take a moment to share it. Someone out there may need a reminder that hope still floats. Comment below where you're watching from. Write "Amen" if you believe every creature deserves love, not pain. And if you believe in second chances, if you believe in the quiet miracles that surround us, subscribe to our channel. Because at Kindred Creatures, we tell the stories that the world needs to remember. May God bless you, and may your heart always be a safe harbor for people, for animals, for the lost and the found.